we should be live. If there is some white noise in the background, I apologize for that. I have a 3D print running. This is a pretty long print. It's about 10 hours. And that is going to cause some background noise. There's also a heater running, and well, it's New York, so it's kind of chilly. But for this particular resin that I'm using on this printer, it takes it's happy at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and so that can be a little tricky. So got to heat the room, keep the office in that temperature range when the print is going. It's a very long print. Anyway, there's a lot of little fiddly bits about that and details on 3D printing that are relevant for another time, I think. So right now I'm going to load up some reference into PureRef, and we'll go from there. So I got a little castle project coming up. I don't necessarily need to jump into that as a it's like one of these principles of I don't want to make this night about preparing for something else, but rather to be a little more spontaneous with it. Let's see. One of my favorite themes is the artifacts, so I'm checking those out right now. Let's see. Actually, looking through my reference list here, this one might be kind of neat. I have a bunch of Roman sculptures and reliefs. That might be a bit on the traditional side. Oh, this is cool. This one is looks contemporary. I don't recognize the work or the artist, but here is the sculpture. I have a couple of these sculptures pulled up here. This obviously looks more contemporary. This is more traditional. But just love the way the light passes through it's stone. Just that thin layer there, the light passing through and getting all warm in that area. That's really interesting. So I might pull that one up as a reference. Let's see. These are I think that's a sarcophagus with put a deep relief on that. So, reliefs are interesting. You paint them differently. They have it's a whole art form unto itself. So this might be interesting. There are some other sculpture reference boards that I have, but I'm gravitating towards this one. I think this would be fun, and that was pretty cool too. So I'm going to pull these over back onto the secondary monitor, and we will get going with that. Alright, if you have any questions, throw it in the chat, and or any comments really, any issues, feel free to let me know. I would rather know sooner than later than get caught up and find out later that there was some kind of a problem. Alright, so instead of doing the black background, there is a black background there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start with this kind of neutral here, and I'm going to bring in some, whoops, interesting. I'm going to select my bright value, which is going to be, in this case, I might go in this area, greenish yellow, and very desaturated. And then for my shadows, I'm seeing quite a bit of warmth in those shadows. So I'm going to go somewhere like that. And the strongest contrast is right in the midtones of the shadows, where light is able to pass through. So anyway, this color fill is going to act as my base here, and we can bring in the background value later. So I'm just going to start with the major shapes here. Get these blocked in, and then we can start working on our relationships. Actually, these tend to be more subtle than we tend to depict them. All right, I'm just going to fill all that in. This has a we call it Rembrandt lighting, where you have this triangle right here on the eye. You still need to get the relationships worked out here. And this photograph actually, as nice as it is with that, rich mid-tone, the highlights get blown out. So we may be bringing some of that back in. And this eye is, well, we don't have to get the shape right. We need to get the placement right first. But the shape is perhaps a little unconventional at this angle. All right. Still working the larger shapes here. I need to bring this, pull this back towards the light. Some light here. This collar. This dark mass right here is actually the collar popping up. And so we want to reference that. A little square. Don't want to get too lost in the weeds with trying to get these these little details in there, because we want to get the relationships correct. But I do want to be able to see where one shape starts and another ends, so I'm throwing a little bit of that in there. Lighten this area up here. and clean that shape up a little bit to be more representative of what I'm seeing in the reference. Now this comes up and over. This tide area comes down farther. There's like a she's got a cloth tied over her head here, and then the knot is kind of hidden from our view at this angle, and it comes out here, down, and then on the shoulder. And it looks like the shoulder needs to come up higher. All this needs to get a little tighter to the neck. And we're just getting the shapes right, checking the relationships between shapes to see that they are placed correctly and have the appropriate proportions. And I think tonight, you know, I usually say this at the end, but I think it should be said at the beginning. If you are watching and you are an artist and you're looking to, you know, enjoy the stream, but also maybe pick up some ideas, I would definitely recommend that you have your own project right now. Maybe watch this on the side and ask questions as we go, but I always think it's more beneficial to be picking up ideas and applying them to your own projects right away, rather than kind of trying to pick things up by osmosis and then you know, maybe a day or two later try them out. And you always get more mileage out of practice. In my opinion. Alright, this shape is both wrong and in the wrong place. So, get that worked out. This is one of those areas where you have to consider that we think of shapes in a certain way. We think of the eye being a particular shape, and I don't just mean, you know, a three-dimensional form. I mean, you want to draw it like an icon, you know, like this is an eye, right? But depending on the angle, that eye might look like that. You know, there's a lot of variance in how it's going to end up being depicted on the 2D canvas based on our viewing angle, the three-dimensional form, and of course we want to have these lined up, you know, so it's not going to help us if we paint a nice eye and then it doesn't line up with the other. So what you can do, I mean, I'm seeing several things that need to get worked out on this painting, but what you can do as far as getting eyes lined up, you might do it on a separate layer here. Start to look at the rhythms, right? So we got the brow here, and I can see can see the jaw coming in like this, and then the brow cutting, or rather the center line of the eye cutting across there, and the brow is actually kind of straight over that. And then you got this shape here, and then the forehead. You can start to separate these, you know, so this is from the lip to the edge of the cheekbone where it meets the corner of the eye. So you get these arcs, get those rhythms going. It helps to place things where they need to be. And where the eyes intersect the brow, you can have these two arcs coming together. So these things help us get our measurements correct. Right. The nose itself, I might have gone too far out with that. We're going to soften this up here. Soften up this cheek a little bit. So I'm squinting and getting a big picture of the shadow shapes. I think I need to move this eye in just a little bit. Cheek, we're going to bring it down a little bit here. And this is the part that is blown out on the reference. This side of the face is all just one value of weight. And the nose shows these real subtle shifts in it. Really the subtlety I want to come back to and work that in. Typically I start with the shadow shapes and get those correct. First. I think we're going to be spending some time on these eyes and just judging on how this is going so far. And I was watching a James Gurney video recently. If you're not familiar with who he is, he's Incredibly skilled artist. As I think it's Danitopia is the name of his, one of his more popular works. It's great, great artist. Puts out a lot of great information. Yeah, I was talking about focusing on the eyes early in the painting, so that you get that nailed down, then the rest of it just kind of falls into place. We do gravitate towards eyes. Now this is going to be slightly challenging because this is a sculpture. So there's it's more about getting the form, but we can sometimes confuse the shadow shapes with local value if we're not careful. Actually, that comes lower. That's interesting. This comes up here. There's a little. Here we go. Get this background worked in here. We're just going to merge all this together. Merge those layers. And I'm tempted to use the liquefy tool because I see there's quite a bit that needs to be changed in terms of the relationships between parts. But there's a certain amount of repainting that's going to need to happen anyway. I'm going to start with liquefy because that'll just be quicker. That will save us a lot of torture. And we'll start scooching these parts around here. This eye's definitely over farther. The face is tempted to say elongated, but it's stylized for sure. It has an interesting shape to it. Kind of comes to a point here in the chin, and it's smoothed out. The nose seems almost unrealistic to me, you know. All right, but let's get the location of these things worked out. So this shape here is much tighter on the reference. And what I mean by that is I certainly have a tendency to flatten things out, where I'll see a shape and then think about what that shape is in terms of like a facet, you know, or that form. But really, from the angle of which you're viewing it, it's probably much more condensed. You're probably not seeing as much as you're imagining in your head. So that is something to look out for. It's certainly something that I've recognized in my work, that I tend to do. Let's see, that shape is almost, yeah. Just checking out these relationships between these shapes here. And I mean, some of this I'm just gonna have to repaint. You know, it's just thicker lines, thinner lines. But for this part, the liquefy tool, just need to get the relationships worked out. The size of this versus the size of, you know, the next piece over. Still a lot to do with the expression. Just kind of looking down in our reference, and we'll bring this area of her head covering over a little tighter. That's probably good. All right. So, a few relationships we got to get worked out here. So, we have this right here is something that's showing up in the background. I don't know if we need it, but if we want to keep it, then what we need to do is, or rather what I'm thinking we need to do is incorporate it, have it, you know, move through space so that you kind of see it pop up again. I'm not really seeing that directly on my reference, but it looks like maybe her head covering is kind of you know, folds off to this side, and then it also folds off the other direction, but we're just seeing it, it's being obscured. So we have to decide whether we want that detail in there. Even though we see it in the reference, it doesn't mean that we have to depict it. It may be advantageous to simplify and remove it. Don't want to get lost in the weeds there, but I'm trying to get some of these folds articulated here. And that is not quite as bright. And pretty soon here we'll be starting to introduce some color into the shadows and midtones to show the direction of the form by the light that's hitting it. That's, I think, one of the wonderful things about painting from sculpture is that, especially marble sculpture, you get that richness that I talked about at the beginning in the areas that are really thin and light is able to pass through them. and then you get this kind of desaturated shadow on the thicker forms. Okay, and then earlier just a minute ago, I was talking about articulating these folds, and I think it's time to do that on the headpiece here. Head covering, I guess you'd call it. I'm just spacing out on that term. Scarf? I don't know. Alright, and I do not feel that we need to get every value exact before we bring color in. That probably would be a good idea, but we can introduce color, and that's going to shift the values anyway. So as long as we are mindful that we're getting our values in the correct zones, and we can introduce that color sooner than later. I do want to get a little bit more work done on really defining the shapes here. But what I've been saying about color will be relevant here very soon, because especially in this area, you get lost in what is a shadow on this plane versus the shadows being cast onto the brow. Okay, we're going to bring these up and mute them a bit. So muted shadows in here as well as in here. The shadow on the lip really is not, it's actually catching more light, some bounce light. Again, I want to be careful that I'm not depicting things that I want to see, but don't actually see. I want to believe that there's a, this the shape of the cheek there, but in my actual reference, from this angle, I may be seeing much less of it. I think I am. This shape worked out here. This kind of meat. It's a very weird eye shape. I feel like this is going to be the focus of this whole thing, is trying to figure out that eye. I have to say, these sometimes must be frustrating to watch, you know? I mean, I know where I'm headed with this, and still needing to work out that particular area, but man, I could see watching this and just thinking, this is exactly what you need to do. Just do it. Why won't you do it? Alright, so my reference, this is actually a bit darker up there, this shadow. And all of that bounce light is not quite as bright as I have originally depicted it here. Okay, and we got a shape here. This picks up. I neglected to put that in earlier. A little hot light there. I love these nice smooth transitions. And there's a depression down there. And smooth these out. This will be a soft edge and hard edge. That's another wonderful thing about these sculptural studies, is that you have the rounded, smoothed out, sanded out forms, and then the hard, crisp edges. This actually almost kind of disappears here. That edge gets lost. Okay, we are going to introduce some of that color that I was talking about, and I'm just going to do it with overlay. So that way we can manage the amount of effect that it's having. Oops. A little bit more towards, yellow orange in here. It's a little bit coming through, and as I explained earlier, this is anywhere where there's light that's able to penetrate through the stone, you get this nice orange warm light coming through, and it can cast as well, so you'll see that warm light, and then it can kind of spill out onto the into the shadow beneath it. Okay, still quite a bit of adjustment to do, I can see, but I want to get this in so that I'm able to use that color to explain, to describe visually the form change. Alright, now we will switch to our more muted color, which is, I would say, almost kind of a toss-up between like a gray-green or I'm tempted to go more bluish just because that's complement, but I'm going to go more in the green area and gray, and bring bring some of that in. Maybe not quite so heavy. Mouth needs to be moved up, the mouth and nose. And we're going to get our yellows here, move more towards yellow and brighten it up a little bit. We're actually going to bring this value up here. Almost glowing in there. Same here. Almost have this glow. In some of these areas, I'm going to use the overlay to deepen the shadows, make those darker. Not too much on that one. So hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of that effect. Not quite there yet, but getting ourselves closer. The values are going to be very important here because you won't see this kind of intensity in these kind of orange hues here. You wouldn't see that unless there's a significant backlight pushing that. Now I want to be careful to be a little more subtle than my reference because it is so blown out. But I do need to make sure that the relationship between that light and the color that's being pulled out, just that richness, is related to the proportional to the amount of light that it's receiving. A little more subtle. I'm going to grab a different brush, a softer brush. Just go with a kind of standard soft round, if you could find it. And I'll probably have the spatter on there, so that'll put a little bit of texture. Oh, just looking at the chat here. Hey Eric, how's it going? Thanks again for your advice. I've been doing focus studies and improving daily. That's awesome. Yeah, sorry I didn't. I intended to get back to you a little more on the question about selling your work and where you can do that and how that works. I do think that is kind of, I don't want to say that it's unimportant. It is important that you know, if you're pursuing a career as an artist, you have to figure out how to actually make money at it. But the selling your work, I think, as cliche as it sounds, you know, the more work you do, the easier it is, the easier it will be to sell it. You know, I hate to say it will sell itself, because there are really very talented artists who just aren't very good at the selling. And I wouldn't say that I'm particularly great at the selling, but I have found that the more I focus on the work, the easier it is, because then you know exactly what to say because you're working on it, right? Like it's in your head. What I shouldn't say in your head as in like, oh, it's all up here. I mean, like, it's in your head in that it's what you've been thinking about. It's what you've been working on. It's you're focused on it. You understand what it is that you're doing because you're doing it consistently, and so it's so much easier to speak to your work when you're more diligent with your work. So anyway, I wanted to get back to you on that question, but I think the more important thing now is to develop the body of work, and then people will start to ask you questions about it, and just keep getting it out there in front of people, and build up an audience of people interested in what you're doing. And that could be the technical side of it. It could also mean the content side. I mean, the short answer on that one would be to make work that people are already excited about. So that you find a niche like old sports cars or something, and if that's something people are interested in, you meet the desire to have art in that venue, right? But if that doesn't interest you, that's not going to be a long-term solution to how do you sell work as an artist, right? So finding that intersection of what you like and what an audience is interested in, what they want to put on their wall. I mean, that's kind of a whole other world. I know some really talented artists, and I would say even artists who are doing things that are very interesting that it doesn't lend itself to being ornamentation, and so that's a whole other kind of ball game. But anyway, not to get too jump right in there, but I was just thinking about those questions that you asked, and I had not gotten back to you on that last one. Had intended to do so. So you said you've been doing focus studies. I think you had said you were going to do character studies. Is that what you've landed on, or have you shifted to something else? Let's see. Get these. This whole lip section I'm going to adjust. I think it all comes up a bit higher. I say that and then I jump right to the eyes. I think both need to be addressed. Actually, this whole section is quite a bit warmer. Okay, so the eye and the lips are my primary concern at this point. I feel like I keep coming back to this, and I have to get it right, or we're in trouble. In the reference, this is kind of a lost edge here. It's hard to tell whether that's a cast shadow. There's a shadow cast on the forehead, right here, this area that I'm painting. And there's this warm, really bright kind of backlight coming through here. Maybe not quite that extreme. Exaggerating that a little bit. But right in this area, it's hard to tell whether that is whether that's the fold area or whether that is the shadow that's being cast. I'm gonna take a guess and say that it's actually the cast shadow. And I'm also gonna brighten this up. A very subtle shape there, but it is there. Okay, let's not ignore the crazy eye in the room. These have a little bit of those warm tones in there coming through. This angle is okay. I see. There's a little bit of a shadow here, very subtle, and then he's up here. Another subtle shadow in here on the eye. This shape. So this edge all kind of gets lost here. So it's a hard edge on this side. Right there. Then it gets lost here and comes around. And you can have a lost edge there and here. It's just a little bit taller. Not so much of a core shadow there. So when I talk about a core shadow, what I mean is right as the form turns, you would see a darker shadow in here because you'll have reflected light, bounce light, bouncing back and kind of illuminating the farther edge. So it doesn't work, directly as like the farthest away from the light source is the brightest. It's actually a little more right at the point where it terminates. All right, I'm going to soften up some of these shadows in here. And in fact, this whole part of the face here in the reference is quite a bit softer, quite a bit darker. Again with that core shadow right in there. And then we need to soften this up. Because the tightness of that edge will describe how quickly that form turns. I'm going to soften this up a bit so it's not all blown out in there. And that we're just going to have to invent it. Figure out where we want it to shift and turn. One of the things that's interesting about this sculpture is that it doesn't have these very hard features. Let me zoom in a little bit, that may help. See what's going on here. It doesn't have these hard features where there might be a cut, right here for the nose. It's just all kind of softened out. Let me grab some of this deeper orange red here. I guess they call that brown. And I'm going to bring it right in here. Warm that up. And this does have a little more of that almost yellow hue there. And this is nice and light passes through that stone. Okay, we're gonna sculpt this out a little bit here. We need a core shadow. That will go down and then to the tip of the nose here. And then we'll bring in some of this reflected light, so it's going to be a little less, not quite as warm, but a little bit brighter than our core shadow. And maybe a little brighter. To get that reflected light there. Just a little bit under the nose here. Okay. Just a little bit of this warmth in the lip as the light passes through there. And we're going to cool this off where it terminates, where the edge turns there. And that warm and cool is going to help us out. This is what I was talking about earlier, about getting that in the scene sooner than later, so that we can utilize that warm and cool to describe the turn of the form. Okay, this shadow shape needs to be worked out here, where it's needs to actually be given a shape. Okay, we're going to soften all that up. Separate these shapes here. So this is like a kind of a flap of the skin, or not, well, it's kind of fleshy actually. I wouldn't call it a skin flap necessarily, but right here that goes over the eye. And we want that to intersect here with the eye. Now normally when I paint this, I exaggerate the intersection of those forms, and we'll have like just a hard line or whatever here, the fold. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole, I think, aim of this sculpture, it seems, is to soften a lot of those things out. So we're going to stay true to that. In no small part because I will learn from that. If it's not my comfortable normal path, then it's probably a good thing to try out, see where it takes us, bring me out of my comfort zone. Okay, I'm going to bring a little bit of this warmth in here. Not too much, but a little bit there. Squinting as I'm looking at this image to see what needs to be pulled forward and back. There's a certain luminance to this, you know, it's really interesting. And I keep saying it, so I apologize for that, but it is just there's just a certain magic to marble, you know. I think that's why it has the reputation that it has. Chiseling out that shape a little bit there to show that this is in front. Now let's clean up this this lip area here. There's a very soft transition there. So here we can soften this up a bit. Again, with the point about exaggeration, you know, this is not, that lip shape is not really accurate to the model I gave her. A pretty exaggerated philtrum here, this area here. Again, you know, the sculptor softened all this out. You know, far more than I'm used to depicting it. Soften up that shadow a little bit there. And need to line up this shadow with this soft transition. This seems to be almost more a straight line there.
Just glancing over the chat. See a bunch of emojis. Starry eyes. Now, so the one thing with this splatter brush, you know, it's soft and has that little bit of texture. But if you go too deep with it, you know, too much of a jump in texture, then it's going to I mean, at least in that case, it looked like whiskers almost. You know, you don't want that. Give you too much of an effect, which you might not necessarily be going for, that textural effect. Mid-tone there, and actually bring that whole chin down in value. It's very, very bright. And then I gotta figure out this transition here. Just soften it up, I think. This whole side of the face. So it's got this catch, not a catch light, rim light. That terminates just under the chin. But I want to soften up the angle on it. Again, it's just very subtle, and I've exaggerated it unintentionally. So now we're going to work back and forth and get that actually, this whole bit here probably should come over farther. And again, with the subtlety, it's a lot flatter. You know, I ended up curving that quite a bit, but it's kind of like this. And then this all kind of blends together there. Alright, we'll reintroduce this rim light. Kind of gets thinner here, and then picks up again there, and that's a little bit of a angle there. And this is really warm in this area. Again, that, you know, light being able to pass into that point. Okay, let's get some of these other areas addressed. You know, I think it's true what we said earlier about, you know, spending more time on the eyes, getting that, you know, the lip area figured out. There's so much emotion in that face, or rather, so much that we connect with when we look at a face. It's all in the eyes, and so if we can get that sorted out as kind of the centerpiece of the painting, then the rest of it should fall into place. Still bothers me. Still want this to be something about it. Okay. Let's zoom out and reassess. I'm going to take a step back. Okay, so there's a few areas I'm going to soften up here real quick. Here in the neck. And that has a little bit of that greenish light there. The shadow actually is a great candidate to be softened up. There's a little bit in here that not really sorted out because it's really not that important, but I think it will help the understanding, you know, visually what we're looking at there. And it's just a matter of getting these two shapes. So I'm actually going to take this here, kind of terminate there. It's going to pick back up there. So it's getting these shapes to correlate with each other. So this shape comes in here, and this shape's coming in this way, and then where they meet, you get that little point, and that's enough information to understand what's going on there. Okay, we're going to add a few more little bits and bobs here. Just sort some of this out. There's a little cut here. And what I love about these is they don't follow the reason of drawing, really. Like, the way they pick up light is the whole kind of pits and peaks thing, where you could have a line that, you know, starts as a shadow, and then as it turns over the form, it starts to pick up light, and so then it is a lighter line, you know, but it's the same line, and you can kind of have the two reference each other, you know, your bright line and your dark line, as long as they are in line. Then what you have is you have a form that's being referenced. Okay, all of this needs to be darker. You know, that's, well, let me back that up a little bit. It's not the focal point, so it does not need to have that much value. Let's get our warm shadow value here, bring it in. Darken it up. Our reflected light, or rather our cooler value to play off of each other here. I feel like I could simplify this quite a bit in here. I like the textures of it, but I feel like the more I'm trying to sort it out into you know, a more refined, communicated shape, the more it loses that kind of spontaneity. Oh, that's interesting. Looking at this, I get this shape completely wrong here. It actually curves down more. Like that. And then it has a nice transition of cool to warm. And then that's a kind of interesting color to place, you know, what this value is on that side face there. In fact, I think all of this is just a little bit darker in there. That. And then this is actually all a bit lighter in value here. So let's get that rim light there, and then a little bit. Oops. And we'll just get that tighter, clean that up a little bit there. All right, there's a whole bunch going on in the reference there that is actually pretty pretty roughly textured, which is cool, fun. It's not the focal point, so we'll return to that if we need to. I don't want to spend too much time trying to really nail down something and communicate something that's really not that important, you know, to the whole image. But if we get to it, it is a fun little secondary detail. All right, I'm gonna sort out some of this a little bit more here. You might hear that printer in the background buzzing. I'm slurring my words too much lately. I don't know what's happening. No. Let's see, some of this light here. There's a little more definition on these folds. This fold is more of a triangle, long, thin slice than it is like a rounded form. Curvilinear, I guess you could say. And we're going to separate those. You know, could have condensed that shape into one angle, but I want them to have just a little bit of a edge there, so you can see that those are different shapes. Deepen that cut a little bit there. Earlier I had mentioned how relief is kind of its own art form, and that is something that still shows up in sculpture, but to a much greater degree in relief, and that is, you exaggerate some forms to get the effect. You might cut that, these folds, you might cut them a little more deeply and have a nice sharp area in there that isn't really representative of the true form, but it draws out the shadows and the lines that make the shapes relate to each other. So there's a little bit of that, I guess hyperbole, exaggeration going on in sculpture, but certainly in relief, where that's like taken to an extreme almost, Bring all this value down. That might be a little too much, but I want to bring this value down here. Separate these shapes and give it a little more definition there. Could probably deepen. Could deepen this area right here, where this is not much light is going to bounce in there. It's casting a shadow onto the part below it. Right here, so this collar comes around with this, what would you call this? This fold in the scarf, on her headscarf, is coming over here, casting a shadow onto the form. And then, if your bounce light obviously is from light bouncing around, so in a really tight space like that, it's not going to have as much of an effect. It's not going to be able to get into that area. Okay, this here I'm seeing all needs to be darkened up quite a bit. Smoothed that out earlier, and I think that was mostly the correct thing to do, but actually I think it needed to be darker where it meets the edge of this here. Same principle that I was just talking about with ambient occlusion. That's where your light would not be able to penetrate into those deeper crevices. Wouldn't be able to bounce around. bounce back towards the viewer. I should probably explain what I mean by that for those that are not aware. You know, when you're seeing light in a scene, it's bouncing. Bounces off the object and into your eye. And so the angle, it's the angle of the light, it's the position of the viewer, and the angle of the facet. That is the face of the surface that is reflecting the light, you know, your subject. So the light's going to bounce off of this object and into your eye. And you know, the more direct that bounce is, the brighter it's going to be. Some things do affect that. So, for example, the surface finish, if it's very smooth, it's going to bounce light more directly, and it's going to look shinier because there's a quite literally a reflection of the light source that is able to bounce into the viewer's eye. But on a matte surface where everything is rough, you know, that light is going to bounce all over the place, and so you don't get that direct highlight, which is again literally the reflection of the light source, because it's bouncing all over. Okay, let's smooth this out. So then, as that pertains to the shadow areas that I'm talking about, light is going to hit your object and bounce towards your eye. So again, with that diffusion, if it's a matte surface, you know, it's a little textured or rough, it's going to spread and have a softer edge, and it's going to bounce around. The more gloss your surface is and the harder your light source is, the more of an effect that bounce light is going to have. It's going to bounce, you know, it's going to bounce off, say, this edge here and bounce up and hit the bottom of this, and then you're going to have this reflected light, you know, down in here from hitting this surface and bouncing up. And that's where, partly where we're talking about the temperature, the warm or cool value. All right, your backlit surface is going to be warmer, and the bounce light is going to be cooler because it's bouncing directly off of this and hitting that. It's not, well, I guess that's a whole other kind of topic as far as light passing through objects. But anyway, when you get to these crevices, you know, that light that's bouncing around, it's not going to find its way into that little area and then bounce directly back into your eye as the viewer. And so that's why you have ambient occlusion, where areas that are tighter, that don't have, that aren't as open to the environment, are not going to get that bounce light effect. I feel like that's maybe a little too strong there. I'm going to dial that back. Just a little. even though that is soft in my reference, it has quite a, it has a distinct shape to it. Again, here, that cast shadow from this part of her head covering there. Just a little sliver of it, and then it ends right here, and then actually this is a bit a little bit brighter in there. And it comes down farther. Smooth this light out here. And just smooth all that out a bit. That might be too bright. And I also want to want this gesture of the neck. I don't want to lose that. I want that to be in line with what we're trying to communicate with the subject itself. I'm going to deepen some of these shadows just a little bit here. Okay. I'm going to feather this out, this bounce light here. That rim that comes down here, I'm going to feather that out here. Inch this edge over here. I'm just trying to introduce some more value where we don't have much really in our reference. Soften this down a little bit. see, I'm going to bring this a little lighter here and then maybe a little softer back here. We'll just go to do a new layer, set to darker color, and that way we can paint some darker colors in, and it's not going to brighten up our background or our shadows at all. So we can start to get these smoother transitions here. Start to get a transition on these rounded forms here. Let's see. So we're in, what do you do? Darker color. So we can get color that's not quite as dark as that core shadow, but darker than our reflected light that we put in there. And soften that up. You know, just make it a little bit of a darker reflected light. Same thing here, if we want to bring in just a little bit of core shadow there. Maybe we want to smooth out some of these transitions. Like here, for example. Let's see if we round this form a little bit. Don't want it to look too airbrushed. It's too much of the time there. Alright, let's go in with an overlay. We'll start to deepen some of these colors, hues here. Good on that. We'll do another one for a cool color. Just to see if we can create a little bit more of a color contrast. We might not stick with this. And like I said, I was tempted to go with more blue, but I do like the idea of stepping away into a more greenish territory with this. So we might shift this over. And I'm re-emphasizing some of these core shadows. I think I need that line there. that is getting too dark around this eye. In fact, I'm going to actually, I'm going to bring this back a little bit. I do like how we've defined some of those shapes, but I want to maintain the softness. Okay, and then here, let me brighten these up. Go with lighter color this time, so that way we won't be darkening our brights in there. Alright, this darkening overlay, I'm going to shift this over. So I'm going to do hue saturation. It's in kind of a blue territory. I'll just do colorize so that we can just see directly what color we're dealing with. So I want this kind of greenish tint to it. But low in saturation. Maybe more of a ochre, like a green, yellow green. Okay, we'll do a actually, we'll do one more layer before we get into our color balance, and then I think that's where we'll call it for tonight. So I'm going to grab these light values, and we're just going to do a little bit of a bloom on it. Especially like I had mentioned here on these edges, where you have this strong light. Do a little bloom on those. So there's two light sources here, it seems. You know, one coming from the right, and then another from the left and behind a little bit. Let me zoom out on this. I actually think that chin might be a little too emphasized, too strong. Let me clean that up real quick. In theory. Real quick in theory. And let me zoom out. And then we need to bring this shape in like that. Alright, now let's zoom out. And I think this shape needs to be adjusted right here. Shape of the lip. I'm not sure if that helped very much here. Okay. That whole chin could come in. Alright, back to our bloom layer here. And we'll go to play with curves, may as well. If we want to get everything into a brighter, brighter shadows. so forth. And then we'll do color balance. I really need to calibrate my monitor one of these days, because I notice that there's a fairly significant difference between my left monitor and my right, and I have a calibration tool. I just need to crack it out. Sometimes, I've mentioned this before, sometimes when you do a color balance, it's the color that you like, and sometimes it is actually just the effect on the luminosity that's interesting. So let's play with that. So it's normal, that's luminosity, and then we can do another one to do the saturation. So that's increasing the saturation. Bumping the luminosity. And so we've separated this out into its individual parts. The hue, saturation, and value. Yeah, I think I really only like the value. I'm tempted to do a blend if on this, but I know it'll probably crash at this point. So I'm just going to leave this like that. Maybe I'll do the saturation, but just lower the effect. Something like that. Now, it's funny. I had it in my head that we would do like 2 or 3 of these, but I guess I'm out of practice. So I'll do Control A to select everything, Control Shift V to paste it as a new layer, and then I'm just going to do a liquefy on this. I'm looking at my reference. I'm seeing some more significant features on the reference towards the top of the head, and slightly diminished chin. The nose is, well, I don't know if I like that change. The nose is kind of curved the other way, curved out a little bit. Uh-oh. Messing up that eyeball. And before we get too crazy with it, why don't we just, well, let's do a little more. thinking it was probably a good idea to stop there, but I think that there's just a little bit more going on here in our reference. And we'll just stop there. Alright, so let's zoom out and we'll compare the two. A little longer face. I think there's a difference here. Like this area right here is softer. You know, so it does not need to be so defined. And it'll get softened out there. And let's zoom out. This off and get softened up in here. Around the chin, there's a core shadow there. This is actually pretty soft here, that light there. Nah, it's too much. And, actually, this whole it kind of turns an angle here, so I'm gonna make that shadow a little more pronounced, and then modify this edge just a little bit here. I'm gonna move that chin in a little bit too far. All the things I probably should have figured out a little while back. Okay, so we'll compare. Yeah, I think we'll stick with our second version there. We'll soften this just a little bit here. And that's probably a good place to stop, I think. think in terms of our value, I might like to control it a little more. Just real quick, we'll do a multiply. We're gonna grab some of these areas and just kind of bring them back. Just try it out. Should zoom out for this. I'm just bringing the light just into the face area. More or less kind of grading it. Over the form. I'm going to add some color to that so that it's not completely just a black shift. And then of course we're going to dial it back. Let's zoom in. Let's bring in the white for the areas we want to bring out a little more. I don't know if we want that rim light so bright. I'm gonna bring that back. Maybe just do it right on the edge of these shadows to increase the contrast there. Alright, and then we will, well, I guess we need to bring it in here, don't we? Because we have that actually, we have that warm light passing through, so we need to show that there's strong light behind it. Okay, so zoom out to see the whole image, full effect, no effect, and then we'll just start to see where it breaks down and where it's helping out. This is like when you go to the eye doctor and they're like, better or worse? I think somewhere in there. Yeah. I think it does help, you know, lead the eye to more important areas. Okay. I'm just going to do a mask real quick. Grab a couple of these edges and mask them off, just to harden up those edges there. And just to do it, just because I do this, I'm going to bring in a rim, a complement rim light, and we'll see if this gives us anything or if it's a waste of time. Here, it's too dark, so I'm going to I've pinned that layer, and now I'm painting just over the areas that I painted, but I'm adjusting the value to match what I have in mind. And in some cases here, I'm sliding it a little closer to gray, because a gray next to a warm is going to show up as cool anyway. So we don't want to go absolutely crazy with these cool colors that we've added. we can just kind of imply them with some grays. And in this case, I might do, I might go with like darker color, because then it's gonna, it's not gonna have any effect on my background there, but you'll see just little hints of it here and there. Let me zoom in so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So just little bits of blue in there. This is when we set it to normal and darker color. Maybe normal. I don't know. I think there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere. Again, my inclination is to go to the blend if option, but I fear it will crash if we do that. When in doubt, erase it out. I don't know. Just made that up. Pretty good, huh? You don't have to think so. There we go. I think that's... Well, let's have a look at the whole thing and see how that pans out. And maybe increase the opacity now that we've done some erasing. Yeah, somewhere in there. I think this one right here is not giving us too much. This might be a little too aggressive. So that's right. Oh yeah. Get rid of those. Let's see. Luminosity. Normal. Color. I'll just do hue. Lower that just a little bit. I do think since we added in this multiply that we should have more saturation in our midtones, or should be shooting for them at least. Yeah, I don't know what I think about that color balance. Like it's a little bit, there's something off about it. to green. Shadows, midtones. Okay. I think we're going to pause there. I think there's more that could be done. There's always more that can be done. That eye is still kind of bothering me, but we kind of washed it out. I think if we came in and crisped up a few edges, that certainly would help. Take it further. You know, if we just, for example, we take a lasso tool and let's go here. So we get our forehead shape here. And let me just more quickly block that in. Okay, and then if we just clean this up here a little bit, so I just have this be a smooth transition. And the idea being that you're kind of drawing through, or rather painting through the shape. You're not painting up to the edge or painting the edge itself. Kind of coming out of that space or into that space and going right through it. That actually might be a little too dark there. Alright, Control D to deselect, or if we want to do the opposite, so we do Control Shift I to invert the mask, and then paint this, this other edge. Same idea here. You can paint right through it. It's a separate form than what's behind it. Let's see. We could take this and right there, this shadow kind of ends here, and then you get a little more light hits it. And there's a fairly quick fall off there, but there's just like a larger wedge shape in there as those two forms cross over. All right, anyway. Let's see if that's done us any good. We'll soften it up just a little bit. If we zoom out, let's just dial back the effect. There, just sharpens it up a little. And so we would be looking for the main areas that need to be sharpened in order to communicate the focal point, the areas that are most important to us, most important areas that we're trying to communicate. So anyway, I think this is a good place to stop. Yep. Again, plenty more to do and consider here. You know, as I'm looking at the reference, there's quite a deeper shadow in here on the eye. But these are, I think, compositional choices. What you want to emphasize. All right, I think that's going to have to do it for tonight. It is almost midnight, and yeah, this was an interesting one. I think it was challenging to deal with a subject that was much softer. I like to work with hard lines, I think, and so this was good to, not necessarily lines, but harder edge transitions. And so this was good for me, I think, to work under different parameters. So anyway, as always, if you were painting along, if you had another project, I always recommend that. If you are if you're an artist who's looking for inspiration or looking to improve, if you have your own project that you bring and are working on, I think that's the most valuable thing that you can do, is to be able to apply things right away. Otherwise, if you're just around to enjoy the process and the chat, then appreciate you coming along, and thank you for spending your Wednesday night with me. So that's it for tonight. I will be back. I should be back next week. I think the format of these nights will be soon to be adjusted to something else. So I'm trying to get to bed earlier, and I'm also considering other ways to learn and create. Haven't quite figured it out yet, but I want to plant the seed there that there's some thought going into what might be next. So for the foreseeable future, though, I will be doing these painting live streams every Wednesday night. So, all right, that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming, and have a good night.